For 40 years, Owen McKinley has lived with the ghost of his father, a janitor who vanished from a Chicago municipal building in 1981. The official story was a tragic accident involving faulty wiring, but a body was never found, leaving a wound that never healed. Now, as a demolition crew tears down the old building, a call from a foreman changes everything, pointing to a discovery made deep within the building's concrete skeleton that suggests his father's disappearance was no accident at all. We all carry stories of loss, but what happens when the final chapter has been missing for decades? Stick with us to uncover a truth that was buried in concrete and silence for nearly half a century. Owen sat at his small kitchen table, the morning sun casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. In his hand, he held a faded photograph of a man with kind eyes and a work-worn smile, his arm slung around a 10-year-old boy with a gap-toothed grin. Owen ran his thumb over the image of his father, Arthur. The photograph was one of the few things he had left of him. For the world, Arthur McKinley was a footnote in a cold case file, a janitor who disappeared during a late-night shift. For Owen, he was the man who taught him how to tie his shoes, who smelled of pine cleaner and sawdust, and whose absence had defined the entire course of his life. He was 50 now, a high school history teacher, a man who spent his days explaining the past to others while being unable to fully grasp his own. The news that the old Adams Street Municipal Building was finally being demolished had been a small item in the paper, but for Owen, it felt like the final closing of a book he'd never been allowed to finish. That building held the last moments of his father's life, and with its destruction, any lingering irrational hope of finding answers would turn to dust along with the brick and mortar. He had made peace with it, or so he told himself. He had accepted the ambiguity, the not knowing. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. McKinley?" "Owen McKinley?" a gruff voice asked. "My name's Sal. I'm the foreman on the Adams Street demo site." Owen's breath caught in his throat. "Yes, this is him." There was a pause, filled with the distant sound of a heavy machinery. "Look, I don't know how to say this, but you might want to get down here. We found something. The police are on their way, but I thought you should hear it from me first. We were taking down a wall on the 4th floor, and there was a space behind it, a little room. It wasn't on any of the plans we had." Sal took a deep breath. "There's a body in there, sir, or what's left of one. It's been there a long, long time." The drive downtown was a blur. Owen's mind raced, a chaotic storm of dread and a fragile, terrifying hope. He parked a block away from the demolition site, the familiar silhouette of the Adams Street building, now a skeletal ruin against the gray Chicago sky. A single police cruiser was parked near the temporary fencing, its lights off. Owen approached the foreman, Sal, a burly man in a hard hat whose face was etched with a mixture of grit and pity. Sal led him past the chain-link fence to a younger detective who introduced himself as Detective Gallo. Gallo had a calm, steady presence that Owen found immediately grounding. "Mr. McKinley, I'm sorry you had to be called out like this," Gallo began. "The foreman found your name in the old case file as next of kin. We won't know anything for sure until the medical examiner is done, but the remains were found with the remnants of a janitor's uniform." Gallo's eyes were kind but professional. "We'll need a DNA sample from you for comparison, if you're willing." Owen nodded numbly, his gaze fixed on the broken building. 40 years of imagining every possible scenario, from his father starting a new life somewhere else to a tragic, undiscovered accident, had not prepared him for this. The finality of it was a physical wait. While they waited for the crime scene unit to finish, Owen couldn't just stand by. An old, restless energy he hadn't felt in decades surged through him. He needed to do something. Anything. He thanked the detective and drove not home, but to his mother's small house in the suburbs, the house he'd grown up in. She had passed 5 years ago, but he'd never had the heart to fully clear out the attic. Up in the dusty, quiet space, surrounded by the ghosts of his childhood, he found it. A single, sturdy cardboard box labeled Arthur's Things. Inside were the mundane artifacts of a life cut short. Pay stubs, a union membership card, a worn leather wallet with his father's expired driver's license. And at the bottom, A small black ledger book, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. Owen sat on the attic floor and opened it. For the first several pages, it was exactly what it looked like. A meticulous record of household expenses. Milk, $1.25. Electric bill, $40.50. It was a portrait of a working man trying to provide for his family. But then, as he flipped toward the back, the entries changed. The neat columns of numbers were replaced with cryptic, handwritten notes. The handwriting was his father's, but the content was a mystery. CS for 20 boxes light B. CS for 15 gallons floor wax. CS and 5 cases paper towels. The initials CS were everywhere, followed by lists of maintenance supplies. What was this? It wasn't a record of things his father had bought for the house. It looked more like an inventory, a secret inventory. Owen's mind, trained to look for patterns in history, latched onto the initials. CS. Who was CS? He knew he couldn't wait for the police. This was his history, his father's story. The next morning, he went to the Chicago Public Library's municipal archives. After hours spent scrolling through microfiche of old city employee rosters, he found it. A list of maintenance staff for the Adams Street building, dated 1981. And there he was. Carl Stedman, building supervisor. CS. A new, sharper kind of dread began to form in Owen's gut. This wasn't just about finding a body anymore. This was about finding a story, and he had a feeling it wasn't one of a simple accident. He spent the next day tracking down a current address for Carl Stedman. He was retired, living a quiet life in a comfortable house out in Naperville. Owen knew it was a risk, that he should leave this to the police, but he couldn't. He had to see the man's face. He drove out to the tidy suburban home and rang the doorbell. An older man, tall and broad-shouldered, even in his late 70s, answered the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Owen put on his most academic, non-threatening demeanor. "Mr. Stedman, my name is Owen McKinley. I'm a local historian, and I'm writing a piece about the old Adams Street building before it's gone completely. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your time there." Stedman seemed pleased, inviting him into a living room filled with comfortable furniture and family photos. For 20 minutes, he spoke fondly of his years working for the city, a proud man reminiscing about his career. Owen listened patiently, then gently guided the conversation. "It must have been a big crew to manage," Owen said casually. "All the maintenance staff, the janitors." "The best crew in the city," Stedman said with a proud smile. "We ran a tight ship." "I was reading some of the old files," Owen continued, watching the man's face carefully. "I saw a note about one of the night janitors who had an accident there, a man named Arthur McKinley." The change was instantaneous. The warmth in Carl Stedman's eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glint. His posture stiffened. "Don't know much about that," he said, his voice suddenly clipped. "That was a long time ago. He was a drinker, that one. Unreliable. Always said he'd get himself hurt one day, messing around." The words were like a slap. His father had been the most dependable man Owen had ever known. He barely touched alcohol. "The report said he was electrocuted," Owen pressed, keeping his voice even. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're careless," Stedman snapped. "Now, if that's all, I've got things to do." He stood up, a clear dismissal. The interview was over. Owen drove away from the pristine suburban house, his hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Stedman's reaction wasn't just the annoyance of an old man having his memory jogged. It was hostile. It was defensive. It was the reaction of a man with something to hide. As he merged onto the highway back to the city, his phone rang again. It was Detective Gallo. "Owen," the detective said, his voice serious, "we got the preliminary DNA results back. There's no doubt. The remains we found belong to your father." Owen closed his eyes for a moment, the confirmation hitting him harder than he'd expected. "And one more thing," Gallo continued. "The ME gave us a preliminary cause of death. It wasn't electrocution. Your father was killed by multiple instances of blunt force trauma to the back of the skull." This wasn't an accident, Owen. It was a murder. The confirmation that his father had been murdered changed everything. The dull ache of a 40-year-old loss sharpened into a blade of anger and purpose. Owen met with Detective Gallo the next day at the precinct. He brought the faded photograph and his father's ledger. He laid it all out on the table, the secret inventory, the initials CS, and his deeply unsettling encounter with Carl Stedman. Gallo listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. He took the ledger, promising to have his team look into it. Stedman's hostility is a huge red flag, Gallo agreed, especially his lie about your father being a drinker. That's a classic move. Discredit the victim. We'll start digging into his work history, see if anything else pops up. While the police began their official investigation, Owen felt a pull back to the source. He needed to see the place where his father had been hidden for so long. He called Sal, the demolition foreman, and asked if he could get one last look at the fourth floor before it was completely gone. Sal, who had taken a personal interest in the case, agreed to meet him. Back at the site, the demolition had paused around the crime scene. Sal led Owen through the debris-strewn hallways, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. They reached the fourth floor. There, in the middle of a long corridor, was a gaping hole in the wall. "This is it," Sal said quietly, pointing with a gloved hand. The closet was right behind this drywall. You can see it was a clean seal. No door, no handle. Someone wanted this space to disappear. Owen peered into the small, dark space. It was barely 4 feet deep, a concrete box filled with dust, and the ghosts of 4 decades. This was his father's tomb. This was where he lay while Owen grew up, went to college, got married, and became a father himself, all just a few miles away. As he stared, something on the floor caught his eye. A small, dark object half buried in the concrete dust. He pointed it out to Sal. "What's that?" Sal crouched down and carefully brushed the dust away. It was a wrench, a heavy industrial pipe wrench, dark with what looked like old dried blood. "We missed this," Sal whispered, shaking his head. "The crime scene guys must have missed it too. It was kicked into the corner." Detective Gallo was there within the hour. The wrench was bagged as evidence. The pieces were coming together. The secret ledger, the defensive ex-supervisor, the cause of death, and now, a potential murder weapon found in the hidden tomb itself. The police had enough to bring Carl Stedman in for questioning. Owen waited at the precinct, pacing the floor of a small, empty office while Gallo and another detective interrogated Stedman. Hours crawled by. Finally, just after midnight, Gallo appeared in the doorway, his face weary but his eyes holding a look of resolution. "He confessed," Gallo said. "He gave us the whole story." Owen sank into a chair as the detective recounted the events of that cold November night in 1981. Carl Stedman, as the building supervisor, had been running a scam for years. He was ordering excess supplies, everything from light bulbs to cleaning chemicals, and selling them on the side, pocketing thousands of dollars a month. Arthur McKinley, meticulous and honest to a fault, had noticed the discrepancies. He saw supplies arriving that were never used, inventory logs that didn't add up. He started keeping his own private record in the back of his household ledger, trying to make sense of it. He finally figured it out, and, being the man he was, decided he couldn't let it stand. He confronted Stedman privately, showing him the ledger. He gave him an ultimatum: return the money and confess to the city, or he would go to the police on Monday morning. Stedman, seeing his comfortable life about to crumble, panicked. That Friday night, he waited for Arthur in a quiet fourth-floor hallway. He tried to offer him a cut to buy his silence. Arthur refused. They argued, and the argument turned violent. Arthur, realizing he was in danger, grabbed the only thing he could, his mop, and tried to defend himself. Stedman, younger and stronger, easily overpowered him. The mop handle splintered against the wall as they struggled. Stedman, in a fit of rage and fear, grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from a nearby tool cart and struck Arthur from behind. Realizing what he had done, he knew he had to hide the body, and then he remembered the renovation plans. He knew the small, obsolete utility closet at the end of the hall was scheduled to be sealed off the following week. It was a perfect, permanent hiding place. He dragged Arthur's body into the closet along with the wrench. Then, to create a distraction, he went back to the hallway, pulled some live wires from a junction box, and tangled the broken mop handle in them, creating the scene of a freak electrical accident that would send the initial investigators down the wrong path. He knew that without a body, a full-blown homicide investigation was unlikely. A few days later, the construction crew came, put up a new wall, and sealed Arthur McKinley's tomb for 40 years. A month later, Owen stood in a quiet cemetery under a clear autumn sky. A small group of friends and family had gathered. There was no casket, just a small urn containing the ashes of a man they had finally been able to bring home. After the service, as people began to disperse, Owen walked to the freshly dug grave and placed a small, brand new mop head on the polished stone of his father's headstone. It was a small, strange gesture, but it felt right. It was a symbol of the simple, honest work his father had valued, the integrity that had ultimately cost him his life, but had also, in the end, revealed the truth. Detective Gallo stood a respectful distance away. He walked over as Owen turned from the grave. "You did a good thing, Owen," he said. "You gave him justice." Owen nodded, a sense of peace settling over him for the first time in his life. "He was a good man," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "He just tried to do the right thing." The ghost that had walked beside him for 40 years was finally at rest. The wound was still there, but it was no longer an open question. It was a scar, a story of a father's quiet courage and a son's refusal to let him be forgotten. What do you think is the greater tragedy, that a good man lost his life for doing the right thing, or that his killer was able to live a free and peaceful life for 4 decades? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of a long-buried secret brought to light resonated with you, consider subscribing and joining our community. We have many more stories to share, and we appreciate every single one of our listeners. Thank you for being here.